that to a bit later. But definitely, we should introduce ourselves, and then we should have folks introduce themselves.
I'm turning recording on. I just wanted to mention it.
No, stop it.
No. I can turn it off.
Okay, no, it's fine.
Hold on, I've paused.
I just thought I actually have to run, but I just want to say I'm really excited that this group is finally kicking off. So I just thought I'd do a quick flyby. Michael, is there anything that you wanted me to sort of mention?
I think that actually summed it up. It's a thing we've been talking about for a really long time, and you sort of did an initial draft of here's some things we ought to focus on, and it's morphed into this actual working group that is going to be working.
Great. We have commitments that we have to make our telemetry available to at least the research community in the next couple of years, and I'd love to make it available to the open source community. And as of last night, it looks like we're going to be a core part of we're a core part of a proposal that's a large proposal for the East Coast that will be creating a federated cloud between a bunch of academic institutions that's going forward to NSF by January. So there's a lot here. It's really critical that we figure out how to do this. So thank you, guys. And Michael said I should head off so I don't talk too much.
So should we start introductions? Marcel, if you want to go first? And then...
Yeah, sure. So welcome everybody to this first kickoff of this telemetry working group. And as Oren said, it's great to have such a diverse group here gathered together to work on telemetry. And telemetry is like the working title, actually. So, and we can rephrase that also a little bit, because also telemetry is something that people understand differently. So today we want to first get to know each other and then work through that charter document so that everybody agrees on what we're here doing, that we're working on something. And for that, let's start with with a round of introductions, a little bit of your background, what you're expecting of this working group, and if you already know how much commitment or how much contributions you can take to this group, although it might be a little bit vague, that would be also pretty much appreciated. So I'm going to go first. My name is Marcel Hild. I'm working remote in northern Germany for Red Hat for 2 years now on the topic of AI ops. And one of the largest lessons learned there is that you can't have any AI without any ops. So we've been doing a lot of prototyping there, but applying it to a proper operational environment is something that we've fallen short for some time. So what I'm really excited about is that we would do some ops and on a real cluster, and then extract some telemetry out of it and bridge the gap between research, engineering, and operational people, and then also create data so that finally I can do proper AI ops. In terms of commitment, I have a team of some engineers operating this operate first cluster, and data scientists doing something there. So personally, I can talk a lot, but I think I can bring some engineering power also to the table. Sorry for the long introduction. Take longer than an hour. Sorry. So, Raja.
Great. So I'm Raja. I'm a professor at Tufts here in Boston. I do research on debugging tools for distributed systems, and also on architecting systems to make them easier to understand and easier to observe. So of course, this type of research requires lots of data, and that's always really hard to get. So apart from trying to convince my interns to go to companies and bring back data, like it's just hard to get data. So I'm really excited about this. If we're going to try and set up a like a decent production grade infrastructure so that we can grab a bunch of telemetry data and understand what to do with it. What type of tools can we create based on it? Can we, where are the ways we can use all of this data? So in terms of commitment, I have grad students who are really excited to do research and also help out in terms of the infrastructure itself where it's usable. So who wants to go next? Let's go left to right on my screen. So the next person on my screen is Lars.
Hi there, my name is Lars. I'm with Red Hat, the CTO's office. These days I spend most of my time working with the folks at the MOC, first on OpenStack and more recently on OpenShift. I don't bring any more people than myself in terms of commitments. If it involves the environments I'm already working with, I probably have time. If it doesn't, I'm able to talk a lot. And yeah, that's my story.
I'm betting you have a couple of people who aren't that familiar with MOC. Just want to say a quick word about it. So you're muted. Lars, you're muted.
I can do that if you'd like, Raja. My name is Michael Deitzman. I'm the Director of Product Development for the MOC, which means I'm basically the front person for a bunch of really smart engineers and partners engineers. The MOC started as a vision for a shared resource between 5 research universities in the Boston area. And at the time it was formed, there was also a thing called the Cloud Computing Initiative, which we retired, but are sort of bringing back in this concept called the Open Cloud Initiative. One of the things that the MOC has become is sort of this hub and spoke for both researchers in the Boston area, and it's produced a lot of research papers both on the MOC and about computing that are essentially because we can actually see what's going on underneath in ways that you can't in a for example, an AWS or a Google Cloud because that data is not shared. But the other thing is that we have been running an annual summit or conference workshop, which brings together both researchers and people from industry. Some outgrowths of that have been connections through Dr. Zink to the Cloud Lab, National Test Lab, and the Open Cloud Testbed, connections to a thing at Boston University called the Red Hat Collaboratory, which brings together researchers and people from within Red Hat, partnerships around connecting compute capabilities at Boston Children's Hospital and connections to the Northeast Storage Exchange. Basically, we're hosted at a data center in Western Mass called the Mass Green High Performance Computing Center. It's about a 2-acre data center. It's the only data center I know of that essentially has its own power dam, like hydropower dam right next to it, and dark fiber running into Boston and to New York City. So it's sort of this hub and spoke model where there's lots of different things that grow out. If you look at it from my perspective, the MOC, well, we're the center of the hub. And if you look at it from the Mass Green High Performance Computing Center's perspective, I think they're the center of the hub. And similarly with the Open Cloud Testbed. But what we try to do is just act as a place where people can come together and have discussions. And that was out of those discussions and the existence of this data center, we got to this place of going, telemetry is really important to everybody. We better figure out how we actually expose it better. I feel like that was more rambling than I would have liked it to be, and I apologize for that.
So basically, it's an organization that comes together to discuss engineering and research, and also concretely a data center or a set of data centers that's running stuff.
And a small development team that works on core technology pieces for tying those things together.
Great, thank you, Michael. Heidi, do you want to say a quick word? Just going across my screen here.
No, sorry, I accidentally had my mic on.
No worries. Okay. Do you want to introduce yourself quickly, or are you okay? Just.
Oh, sure. I'm Heidi Dempsey. I'm the U.S. Research Director for Red Hat, and we're very involved in MOC and very interested in the open telemetry efforts, and happy to be cooperating with what's going on here.
So I don't know your name, but like your list is Maltron. I'm not sure if that's in quotes, no less.
Yeah, it's just my nickname. Like Marcel said, like I'm a Brazilian and names in Brazil means nothing. So we just come up like a very fancy nicknames. So I'm the product manager for Jaeger in Kiali, which is essentially it's our observability partner toolings that we offer in cloud native space. Telemetry is essentially our basic ABC that we actually use in our products. And I hope that we can actually contribute with some of the discussions here and experience that we bring into the products and also share with the group to foster like innovation in that particular space.
Jirachi?
Sure, yeah, I'm part of Maltron's and Gary's team. I'm part of the distributed tracing team at Red Hat. And I work mostly on upstream, Jaeger, and open telemetry.
Gary?
Hi, yeah, I'm Gary Brown. I work in the Jaeger distributed tracing team in Red Hat. And in terms of interests, I mean, our focus for most of this year has been working towards open telemetry. And I think for this kind of initiative, you know, hopefully, you know, something like open telemetry, bringing a standard to this kind of environment would be the best thing. So, so that researchers don't have to worry about dealing with vendor-specific tooling. So that's what I'm hoping that we can help to bring.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Lazia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Vasya Kalavri. I'm an assistant professor at Boston University, and I do research on stream processing systems and graph analytics. So my interests are aligned with this group because, well, I see monitoring and telemetry analysis as a streaming job, as a continuous process. So I'm interested in terms of how do we build an infrastructure that can keep up with continuously arriving streams of telemetry data. But also we have built a tool called Snail Trail that does critical path analysis on traces. Currently, we've only tried it on stream processing systems, but we are very much interested in seeing how we could port it into something of a larger scale, and quite possibly on like an entire data center. So in terms of commitment, I can't promise much because I'm a new professor. My students have not arrived yet due to visa issues, but hopefully sometime soon I will be able to join with full force.
Thank you, Vasya. Augustine?
Hi, my name is Augustine Navares. I'm a systems programmer at Boston University at Research Computing Group. I work on something called New England Research Cloud that there are several other folks on this phone call that are involved in this project. That's a research cloud based on OpenStack. We're collaborators with Mass Open Cloud. In terms of involvement and commitment, I think that's possibly some of the other NERC folks on this call can speak for that better. There's several of one of us, so we're engaged to see how we can be involved in this effort.
Naved?
My name is Naveed Ansari. I'm an engineer at the Mass Open Cloud. I work on a couple of projects. One of them is the Elastic Secure Infrastructure. Other than that, I do a lot of infrastructure and operational things at MOC. And about commitment stuff, I mean, if there is anything that will be happening on the MOC, I will be pretty much involved in it.
Leaf, hopefully, you pronounced your name right.
Life, yeah. Sorry, Life Madsen. I work at Red Hat, the architect for the service telemetry framework, which is a bus-driven telemetry system primarily focused on telco and fast-fold event delivery. My interest is mostly around access to data and being able to build better systems using that data. And if any of the tooling that I'm involved in happens to be used, I'm happy to help where I can.
And I really like your headphones, by the way. They're really. Theo, you want to go next?
Yes, so Theo Benson, assistant professor at Brown University. Similar to Raja, I also do research on improving performance and availability of distributed systems. More recently, I've been looking at microservices. I have a couple of students that are resources that I could throw at the project. And in terms of interest, I think some of what we've been doing are kind of like AI ops, trying to find ways to use, I don't want to use the word machine learning, let me go with statistical techniques to try and infer problems, or trying to use statistical techniques to try and identify and pinpoint scaling issues within a cloud. So a lot of my interests kind of come from the fact that what we've been using are perhaps toyish topologies or toyish systems, and we're trying to find more realistic workloads and more realistic applications to actually explore our techniques on.
Thank you, Theo. Matthias?
Yeah, Matthias Runge. I'm working at Red Hat in a group, in the same group with Live, and I'm also kind of involved with OpenStack telemetry, and that's why I'm here. Mostly, I'm here. I'm just curious.
Okay. Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill Burns. I'm another Red Hatter. I work in the research team. My primary focus is Operate First. I'm kind of directing that initiative, coordinating it in Red Hat. And obviously telemetry is a big part of it to improve operations of clouds. You need to understand what's happening. So I'm a big supporter of this, and work with, Marcel and others, Lars, that have already introduced themselves. And I'm not necessarily a hands-on guy, I'm a manager, but I fully support this and will do everything I can to help it succeed.
Iwadani?
Quite exciting to have all researchers here in the team. That's awesome.
Great. Iwadani, you want to get it?
Yeah, sure. My name's Iwadani. I'm a professor at Emory, and my lab does a lot of work in characterizing distributed systems. And so I'm pretty excited about being involved in a project where we actually may have some say about what knobs we end up getting, so that we can do the statistical analyses that we'd like to do. In terms of commitment, I also have graduate students to throw under the bus, so I can give you 4 students worth of commitment possibly.
Thank you. Rick?
I'm Rick. I'm a senior SRE on Red Hat's OpenShift dedicated team, meaning we basically manage X amount of clusters of OpenShift for customers. And so as that we're kind of producer and user of telemetry. I guess I landed here through ways of Operate First, and then the monitoring initiative of that. In terms of commitment, I guess if there's like real actionable works items, I can probably just free up time, and that's going to be me that I can dedicate.
Ilana? Hopefully I pronounced that right. Or Lana, I guess. All right, we'll come back to that person, I guess. Larry. Nope. Okay.
Am I on mute? I'm still on mute. Can you hear me? I'm outside. I'm interested. Just look, it's interesting. It's I work for 2 Sigma, which is a hedge fund and a supporter of the MOC. Recently, I'm interested in differential privacy and how we can secure our telemetry data, how we can deal with it working online and historic. So that's that. I'm no longer a professor, so I don't have students, and all my time is my free time. This is not part of my job, so I'm just doing this as part of my interest.
Cool. Thank you. Lana, I see you're back. Or...
Yeah, hi. So my name is Ilana. I'm a student working for Red Hat here in Israel. Mainly working on the CNV on MOC project together with Lars and Nevad. Yeah, that's me.
Okay. Thank you. Idan, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name.
You pronounced it perfectly, thank you.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Idan. I'm also part of the research group, directing it from Israel. My interest here is really the enablement of the open data. I love this initiative. The commitment I can bring to the table is connecting it with local representative, even with IBM research. And I have 2 people in my team. Ilana is one of them. So we might be able to contribute part of our time. And also just going around the virtual room and hearing, it might be even interesting for another team member, Ilya, who works on complex event processing, that might be interesting along the way to have him involved as well.
Thank you. Let's see, Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Cohen. I work at Intel, focused on large-scale distributed data services, especially as they intersect with the data center network. The team that I'm on has a pretty large group of folks focused on telemetry. And one of the most interesting things for us here is really the intersection of intermediate representation as an abstraction for what's becoming more and more of a compiler for SQL access and for machine learning access. You know, being in a chip company and not being able to get your telemetry and differentiated services out and about is a kind of dystopian future. So we're very interested in finding ways to help the open community really take advantage of all the different sources of telemetry and the different chips that are online.
That's great. That's a lot harder, with a much lower level perspective than at least I'm used to. So thank you. Justin or Baby Yoda, depending on.
Yeah, so I'm Justin Riley. I work at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences Research Computing Department at Harvard as an engineer, and primarily these days working on the New England Research Computing or Research Cloud project with Augustine over at BU, which is primarily about providing cloud services to various universities in New England. Obviously starting with Harvard and BU, but you know, as we get into more of a production setting, that would be expanding out. And so obviously, you know, telemetry, metrics, monitoring, those sorts of things are very much, you know, important to run in a production system, and we will have eventually a lot of data. So that's why we're interested in.
Cool. Thank you. Mike Zink.
Yeah, hi, or should I say guten Tag with all the German fellows on the call. So I'm Mike Zink. I'm a professor in the EC department at UMass Amherst. I'm the PI for the Open Cloud Testbed and also part of the leadership team of MOC. And first of all, it's wonderful to see a lot of good friends here on the call, although we don't get to see ourselves in person anymore. I was also co-PI for the Cloud Lab project, and there we built a measurement infrastructure, especially for power consumption, CPU load, and other important metrics for telemetry. And so I'm really interested in what's going on in the larger community, and would learn more about it, and would also like to know if we can contribute with our existing system to some of the efforts. Thank you.
Great. Scott?
Hi, Scott Yokel. I'm the University Research Computing Officer at Harvard. So I direct the kind of strategy for our research computing across the whole of the university. I'm also the director for FAS research computing that Justin is. So in that regard, there's a team of like 30 of us and like 4,000 devices that we maintain. Telemetry is really important. And then from the cloud side of things, we just started the New England Research Cloud. So it'll be important in that space.
Cool, thank you. So is there anyone I haven't called on yet? The two folks who show up as phone numbers. So if I haven't called on you yet, just feel free to just introduce yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm dialed in, but this is Jeremy Stanley. I often go by Fungi on the internet. I am a staff member of the Open Infrastructure Foundation and primarily a systems administrator by trade. Have been involved in many open source projects over the last 3 decades. And my goal is primarily to serve as a liaison between the Open Infrastructure Foundation and Open Infra Labs, since I'm pretty much the only staff member on the East Coast of the US, and a lot of the people involved are in Eastern US and also in Europe. So it makes it a little easier for me to travel to see people when that's, a thing that people actually do again. And also to join calls like this one that might be far too early for my colleagues on the West Coast. So anyway, that's me. Also, I have to drop off because the Open Infrastructure Foundation Board of Directors meeting starts in 2 minutes. But it was great hearing about all the awesome people that want to get involved in telemetry.
Well, thank you. It's a 617 number as well. If you want to chime in quickly and say something.
Hi, this is Wayne Gilmore. I'm the Director of Research Computing at Boston University, and I'm working with Scott and his team on the New England Research Cloud project. And like Scott said, we have a large number of production machines for researchers at the university, and we're moving into the cloud space, and telemetry is becoming more and more important to us.
Okay, thank you. So it's really great that we have such a diverse group of people here actually working on a broad range of things. So next, Marcel, I think we chatted about talking about the charter document. So I think that, so our goal with the charter and this working group is to basically first define the test bed, right? What are the type of things we want to be running on this test bed? And then once we have agreement on that, discuss, kind of the interesting things we could do with that test bed, what people are interested in working on, and discuss cool research topics, engineering topics in that regard. So the charter document has a bunch of stuff. It also has a list of a suggested initial platform. So I think we'll let folks chime in on things that they like or that they think are missing from the charter or from the proposed starting point for the test bed. So does anyone want to start out?
So, I mean, we previously shared the charter document with the invite, and then also socialized it again via email, and some people already put in some notes. So we could do it like in a notary session and just read it out loud. And if somebody says, nobody says anything, we basically agree on it. Or if we assume everybody already read it, then we can discuss or go directly into discussions. Did everybody like read the document before the call? Try to make it short, just a one-pager.
It's probably a dangerous assumption to make. So,
okay. So why don't we just use the 5 minutes of attention and just share the document? I think Jennifer, you're the only person that can share stuff. I tried to share, but I wasn't allowed to share.
I just changed the settings so you can share screen now.
Oh yes, I can share my screen now. What is it? Desktop 2, 1?
Oh, and I don't think I formally introduced myself to everybody, but I'm Jen Stacy. I work with Michael. If Michael's the front end of the MOC, I'm kind of the back end. If he's pulling things, I'm pushing things. And we work together to kind of make all the magic happen with the Ron kind of overseeing all the pieces and whatnot from a different level. So if there's any questions about anything that you need with the group or if I can support in any way, my background is more higher ed. Administration kind of roles. So I'm here to kind of keep the wheels on the bus, keep things moving. Great to see such an awesome, really just engaged group. So
great. Jen, I'm so sorry that I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself. You're just always present.
I'm always there. Yeah. You can't get away from me, and I always find you.
Oh, you've been some instrumental and great help for setting this up. I struggled with some security preferences. Can everybody see my screen now for this Zoom call?
Yes, we can.
Cool. So let's just read it out, and I do a pause after each paragraph. So the problem statement that Raja and I were like sort of making up or coming up with our best intentions is that one foundational pillar of IT operations is telemetry. This means metrics, traces, logs, etc. There's a lack of collaboration between researchers and IT professionals. Production-grade environments are typically closed, but research requires a lot of data and experiments. The current, and everybody just jump in if you disagree or you want to add something, right? So the current solution involves synthetic lab environments which try to mirror real environments. This might be beneficial for some cases like reproducibility and control group experiments, but it can be counterproductive for validating the research against actual workloads. Spinning up synthetic lab environments can be daunting, since it requires a lot of resources and domain expertise. And now to the charter. This group, us, will build upon a realistic production-grade environment operated by IT operations and used by end users and researchers alike. The environment will be open for research around telemetry. Examples of research projects, this environment, examples of research projects in this environment will include, but are not limited to, creating new debugging tools and visualizations, using telemetry data to optimize workload performance, and improving the telemetry itself.
I want to quickly chime in. So one thing that came up in the chat window is like another option instead of spinning up our own environments is trying to get folks to give us data, right? So going off industry and working with lawyers and getting heavily redacted, anonymized data. But something that came up in the chat window is that takes a long one data set. Because there's a lot of back and forth with lawyers and so on. So maybe that should be something that shows up in the problem statement. So, because that's also not quite a great solution.
Okay. Like data is missing or free
Yeah.
data.
Where access to data is controlled.
Yeah. I think the next sentence that is really dear to my heart and something I've been struggling with for the last years is expresses this quite well. Access to all data will be public and under a free license. So if we create and operate such an environment, and that's the definition of that operate first environment, it's sort of the entry agreement that if you run stuff in that operate first environment, you're giving away all the metrics that you produce. It's sort of like the Facebook. I'm signing up for Facebook. It doesn't cost me anything, but Facebook will sell my soul. And if you're doing research on that environment, you're agreeing to that all the logs that you produce will be free and open. And
I'm
all the
not sure
metrics
that our data policy is like Facebook is going to be a big seller.
Oh, it's recorded. Okay, then we can scratch that. So access to all data will be public and under a free license. I think that's a good point in the charter document, I think.
I think I think that's way too broad.
Yeah.
All data means, you know, I don't know. Do you want to make my telephone numbers public or my emails? That has to be.
That's supposed to be
It can't be
telemetry
all
data.
data, right?
It's supposed to be the telemetry data that you talked about.
But
yes, all operational data.
No, that's the
and
same.
as long as we're on. As long as we're on this topic, I think, although I'm all for open data and open source, I think there's an interesting research question is how do you, for people who do care about some aspects of the data, how can we expose some of the telemetry data, maybe not for this working, I think it's part of a question. So like at 2 Sigma, we, even within the company, some things are blocked from other people and there's some things, for example, certain data sets no one should even know about. So it's a research question is how do you get the telemetry data that you need for operations while still securing sensitive data? I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's an interesting question.
I think the focus of this group is to create a framework where it's possible to share data this way. I don't know of any operations organization anywhere that has ever made all of their operational data available. So if you're really shooting for that, it's a really big jump. But having a framework that allows it to happen is something that's already happening in research with things like Dataverse. That would be a huge step forward, just using that framework in the same way that you're saying propose a standard stack. So
you're
we're
saying
going to make it possible, but we're not going to snap our fingers and say suddenly everything is open and free. I mean, you have to, even if you want to do that, you still have responsibilities to protect the personal identifiable information.
Right. Otherwise, you're never going to win the legal battle of the data.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it feels like that is part of the charter. Then it's the creation of such a framework.
Yes and no. So my lesson learned here is that was always one of the showstoppers when talking to people, and that's why I just wanted to get it out of the discussion by just declaring by decree that all operational data, and I don't mean like passwords and phone numbers, right? That's for sure. But if my workload produces logs, I don't want to be in the business of making sure that your logs don't contain any passwords or private identifying information. That's just beyond this research scope because it's a topic on its own. And I think once we have free data sets, we can have another research group looking into PII and data anonymization and all that fancy stuff. But I think adding it to this group will just slow us down. So I'm all for making it as the entry barrier or the entry agreement. If we work in this environment, all logs, all metrics will be public by default.
There's a question of who the users will be of this environment, right? I mean, if it's just us, then maybe we can declare that. If it's going to be real other people, then I feel like we're going to have to say something about anonymization of the data or what data is available. So perhaps that's a broader discussion that we should get out of the way at some point.
So it feels like we need a way to just, I think there's some comments I see going in. It feels like we should put a comment on this as, here are the different viewpoints, and we should move on, only because every time we've started down the path of having that discussion, that's been the thing we've hung up on. And I think that sort of calling out, hey, one possible solution is we say, if you're using this hardware, or this hardware, this is the expectation you should have about it. That may be enough. You can't see me, you can't see who I'm looking at on the screen, but it's really Scott and Wayne who have so much more experience with this than I do that I was looking at on my screen.
I think the only problem with saying just operational data or saying telemetry is we're not really defining what that is. And I think that's the only problem. The thing that needs to be done is that an end user, like a scientific researcher who comes in to use the system, needs to know what data they're giving away. And that's just, and maybe that's all we need to say in the problem statement, is that like all telemetry data for the purpose of CS research will be available for those researchers, right?
And that's actually one of the first action items for this group to work on. What is the telemetry and what's the logging data?
So I think if we just state that there, we know that we define it later. Like the charter is to like, we want to create a place that telemetry is available for the purpose of research.
Yeah.
Right. But saying freely open to the public all data is a lot, I think, grander of a statement. What we really want is we want the telemetry data to be available for telemetry research. Like openly
As well
available.
as for people in the open source community who want to do improvements to the existing. I think that falls under research.
I'd argue though, like once it's available, it's available. So it's better to give people, expectations that it's public.
Well,
not lie to them later.
Yeah, but we can make the decision that we want to put some type of, common copyright on it or something like that allows, like it depends, like we have the liberty to do something like that so that they can have access to it, but they're not allowed to distribute it. They always have to come to this source to get the data, or we can do something like that later if we decide that that's what it is. And making it freely and open and public makes it more challenging for an end user to say, I don't really know what that means. But if we're able to say, well, what that actually means is this particular set of usage of that data.
Then let's just take a step back and define our end users, which we did in this sentence here. We will provide simple ways of creating similar environments for isolated experiments, increasing the efficiency and reproducibility. So if we start off by an artificial environment in that operate first cluster that doesn't have any real users, but still like POC stacks, then I think it's fair to say that all data created from these stacks will be publicly available.
Yeah. And as long as we can also say, and they don't contain any PII and PHI, you're fine.
Yes.
Yes. But that's the difference in saying all data versus data that meets, some other small criteria. That's the only nuance, is they don't know that we're not going to give away their research data along with this, right? They have no concept of what's in the logs. They think that we have the ability to see everything that they do all the time, right? And that's the nuance. We have to describe that to them at some point.
Exactly, but I hope that this group has an understanding what's in their logs, because this group is the telemetry folks.
Yeah.
And
so I just want to quickly point out that we've done a poor job of defining our end users in the sense that there are two sets, right? It could just be us, and then I think that there's much lower standards on like exposing data to people, right? Whereas if it's like some external folks, which I think would be really cool, then we have to obviously work on this more.
Yeah. So I think the end goal would be that any research that's like the vein that's in this group, that this data would be available for them to do research on. I mean, that's the end goal, because that data source doesn't exist currently. And that's the value in doing this at large with a big, community like we have in MGHPCC, is that you would have a wealth of information that you're currently missing when you can't go to the public cloud. They're not going to give it to you, So that has to be the end goal, but it's just thinking, how do we run a really large system that creates a lot of data that real people are using and make everybody comfortable? That's the only nuance. And there's just some fine language about that. So
I think this is getting back to Michael's suggestion, right? This needs better definition and wording, and we should just note that and keep going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. So the last paragraph here was, our meetings will center around the research. We will discuss problem statements, research that group members are performing to address them, and how to evolve the environment to better support research needs. Cool. Now for the goals. Create open data sets for research. Provide access to a platform for telemetry research. Define and implement a standardized application stack, the gold standard. Define research problem statements around telemetry. And iterate over implementations of solutions on those problem statements, which is pretty much a rinse and repeat and agile workflow of starting from scratch and starting with something like Hello World and then iterate over it. And since we only have like 10 minutes left, let's go quickly over this phase one and then hopefully carve out some action items, what we want to have done by the next meeting, which will probably be next year. So phase one, define and deploy a stack that is sufficient for meaningful, realistic experiments. The starting point would be OpenShift, Kubernetes, and Ceph. And we just mentioned that because that's something that we already operate and already have at the MOC in this Operate First Cloud, which is a 9-node OpenShift cluster with attached Ceph storage, and we can deploy workloads there. And folks mentioned that we also want to have OpenStack there in that environment, sure. But I think that's just not accessible in such an open way yet. Then define, yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's the next section. I was going to say about open telemetry as part of the stack.
Define and deploy application workloads that can be run on top of this stack. AI as a service platform, Open Data Hub, that's already being deployed there. Microservice
So do we want to say, I'm sorry, do we want to say something about that this is realistic workloads? The main goal that we have, the benefit that we have over other university groups is we're not going to run just synthetic workloads. It's supposed to be, I hope, that we have realistic workloads.
Yes, Open Data Hub is a pretty realistic workload.
So do you want to put those words in it? But anyway, that's all.
Define and deploy application workloads that can be run on top of this stack. And if we have other realistic workloads that can be run on top of this stack, and the stack is for now OpenShift, then we can include it here. I can bring this open data hub thing to the table. We have a bunch of data scientists and hopefully at some point more external folks also spinning up AI experiments and stuff on that platform. And we have this Istio book info thing that Gary and Juracy and team just like created and made deployable to an OpenShift cluster, which consists of Elastic and Jaeger and the Istio book info sample example application and a workload generator. So that's something that we could deploy there.
Should we add the word realistic also to the deploy and define application workloads sentence? Like, you could definitely just create a bunch of like synthetic workloads that just run on the stack, which arguably would not be our end goal.
So to clarify, it was not developed by our group. It is developed by as part of the Istio project, and I do not think that this is realistic. It was built to demonstrate Istio features. It is, I think, the closest that we have to a real system, I would say, but it's still not very realistic. So.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, it's like a hello world for Istio tests, and that's why we put here define and implement a standardized application stack, the gold standard, and way more at the top. We also said we want to be able to recreate synthetic workloads. So I think it's realistic and synthetic workloads. So of course, you want to apply your research to a real environment, but you also want to prototype your instrumentation and stuff against a repeatable setup. So I don't see it as just realistic or just synthetic stuff, but both of it. And we have AI as a service platform as a realistic workload. That's a realistic application stack that's being run on top of these clusters, used by real humans, people actually spinning up stuff. And we have this Istio book info thing, which is a synthetic microservice application that we can spin up on demand, and we can ingest faults into it.
Vasya, did you want to say something about streaming workloads in here? Would that be something that might be useful?
Yes, even though, as we discussed at our last meeting, there is no really standardized streaming benchmark at this point. We could come up with something, but it would be on the synthetic side. So there are real data sets that we could use as inputs, but we'll have to come up with the applications. So if that is of if that is of interest, I can add some pointers.
Isn't telemetry a streaming data set?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I guess Raza is referring to what kind of analytics you would like to run on top, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. Do you want to provide a bit more detail there? As we say applications on top. I was thinking two things, right? One is, yeah, the data set we get ourselves is potentially a streaming workload. And then they're also streaming, like there's also streaming infrastructure itself that could be generating data. And then understanding the performance of the streaming framework itself is potentially an interesting research topic, which I think is what like folks like Lassie are working on.
Right. So in that direction, yes, we can. So if you're thinking as a streaming processing application on top, and then extracting telemetry data from the running streaming application, yes, we could definitely do that. Yeah, I can add some pointers to the document.
Cool. Also, we're still gonna keep reading, or are we waiting for feedback?
I think that's what we had in the document.
I mean, there's only like 5 minutes left. Marcel, can I ask you something, or generally the group? 2 questions. So for one, I think there's a lot of things to be discussed. Are we planning to basically only have those discussions in the meetings, or is there going to be any sort of process that is going to facilitate like asynchronous discussions? Because otherwise those meetings are just not going to be enough time. And the second question would be like going alongside that. If at some point we come up with actual action items, do we already have a plan on where those would live? So that someone, in case they don't have time to join the meeting, could check in, they can pick an action item from somewhere.
Rick, I love your thinking. That's the only bullet point I had on my agenda. Do we want to create a project board for this so that we can move also between the 2 weeks when this group meets? Because I think the obvious action item would be like defining your workloads, or not your workloads, but your research interests, and can they be met by some workloads that are already in the system, or do we want to deploy this Istio thing, and then who wants to deploy it, who will deploy it, etc. So, and we can have the discussion now, or just vote for it. I'm really good with these GitHub projects. Most of us have GitHub handles. Maybe we create one project under the Open Infra Labs board, org or somewhere, and then we'll collect your GitHub handles and continue the discussion there.
Yeah, we can do that pretty quickly on GitHub if everybody's comfortable with that, and we've begun using it pretty extensively, and it's been pretty good, pretty helpful to have it there. Do folks want to just add their GitHub handles to the bottom of the doc?
Yeah, and we can also ask by email for folks. So in terms of expectations, I think we have the cluster already running. We have Argo CD there, and we have the deployment manifest for that Istio thing. So what I can try to do is, until we next convene, try to deploy it there so that we have something running there. And then if the researchers think in terms of either what kind of workloads are we missing, or can I do my research on top of Istio, Prometheus, Jaeger, traces? Is that basically enough as a starting point? Or do I need historical data? So do we need to store it someplace else in Elastic? Just some food for thought.
Yeah, I really like that as an action item for the research folks too, right? Like can we do research on this? What's missing? Maybe that's like a paragraph or something for folks to write up. And then we can discuss it either offline or at the next meeting.
Great.
I think that's it. So
just in time.
Should we end? Marcel, do you want to do the sign off? And then
yeah, I'm excited to see like 50% IT folks and 50% researchers in one call. And let's really make it a working group and work on something and get something done. And
the only thing is that before we end, do we have nothing to do for the next 2 weeks, or do we? I didn't hear any action items for the next 2 weeks besides setting up a project page.
Well, for researchers, think about if this Istio stack is enough to pose some interesting research questions. For the IT professionals, is get access to the cluster and deploy Istio or whatever you can bring to the table if it runs on OpenShift.
Marcel and Raja, just to confirm, we'll meet again in 2 weeks then on the, what is that, the
22nd?
Yes.
Is that, yeah.
So we'll follow that regular bi-weekly cadence or twice a month cadence.
We'll see. I'll be there. Let's see how many people show up. It's 2 days before Christmas.
Right.
Maybe I wrap myself in a Christmas present.
Were you not closed yet at that time?
No, we close the 23rd. Usually most departments close around noon or 1 on the 23rd.
They moved ours to the 21st.
Oh, wow. You guys got lucky.
They're just tired of paying for all the testing.
If we don't meet the 22nd, then the next meeting, I believe, is the 5th, which everyone should be back. So what I can do is I'll connect with Raja and Marcel, and we can send an email out and get an idea from folks if it makes sense to hold the 22nd or not. And we'll kind of close the loop with everybody via email on that next meeting, as well as the GitHub page set up and the other action items.
And then under the other action items, are we at a place where we feel like we can begin some sort of definition of what the data we want to gather is, or is that a little further out?
I would also continue this discussion either in the Google Doc or in GitHub issues. Maybe break it out into an issue and then have the discussion there. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.